talk about wealth of knowledge. You bring it all together.
Put the work in now to get yourself structured and organized and documented.
We need to grow this top line.
There is no one size fits all for this industry.
Hello there. Thanks for checking out a fresh episode of the Restoration Masterclass brought to you by Encircle. We are talking about profitability this year, everything having to do with profitability. So today we are talking about the idea of when a company gets to the size that there are multiple people in command and what it looks like between owners and lieutenants and first in command, second in command, how to deal with the nuances of having several people up at the top and how that fits into the profitability puzzle, I suppose. So I'm excited to be joined by Tim Hull. He is the general manager of Violand Management Associates. He also has a big background in restoration, has been a lieutenant himself, and understands how all of this looks and works. So Tim, thank you very much for joining me. I'm just going to start by having you introduce yourself to people who don't know you and share a little bit about your background.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate you having me on the show today. I've been, like most people, in the restoration industry by accident for a lot of years. I think I got in 2001, if I remember. So okay. It's been quite a while. I've been fortunate to be a part of a lot of different organizations that were really at the top of their game, I think. Here in Pittsburgh, and eventually landed with Violand Management, still within the restoration industry. So as you mentioned, I've been fortunate to be in that second seat for a lot of the years that I was in the business, and it's definitely an interesting perspective from there. So hopefully we can have a great conversation today.
Yes. Okay. So last year you won the Golden Quill Award for the article that you wrote, Second in Command, First in Line. So when people hear that term, can you explain a little bit about the article and the overall concept that you're talking about when you talk about Second in Command, First in Line?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really fun article to write. And really the kind of the motivator, I guess, behind it was there was a big desire from a lot of the client owners that we worked with to put a general manager in place, get somebody that's a right-hand man or somebody that can, help them run their business for them. And that can mean a lot of different things at the top, really. But what we noticed was that there needed to be maybe some clearer expectations from the people who were going to sit in that seat as to what their real responsibilities were. But also to maybe clarify the expectations of what the owners have going into it, because I think a lot of them had the misconception that if I just let somebody deal with the day-to-day operations, but don't really give them the authority that they need to have that influence or positive influence on the business, then things would still be okay. I kind of put my thoughts down on paper. When I first wrote it, I sent it to Chuck, our owner, and I said, "Hey, can you take a look at this? Because I want to make sure I'm not crossing any lines here."
Yeah.
And I haven't written a resume in a while, so I didn't want to start. But he was gracious enough to give me some really positive feedback and even make some suggestions to the piece that we put in place there. And I certainly didn't have winning an award in my mind when I wrote it. It was more for the clients. But it was cool from the standpoint of it kind of fell in line with the title, just kind of fell in line with the piece, right? And obviously the second in command kind of refers to those individuals who make their living running other people's businesses. Mm-hmm. And again, that's kind of the seat that I was fortunate to sit in even today, really. And from that, there were a lot of kind of fundamental elements that the people who were the lieutenants, if you will, that they had to recognize and understand to be successful. And I outlined those in under the line, first in line, or under the phrase first in line.
Yep.
And really that it refers to four big things: being the first in line to listen to the owner, try new things, accept responsibility, and sacrifice. And the article just kind of wrote itself from there. So yeah.
You have lived it out in multiple capacities. I know that. So is there a certain revenue point where you find cleaning and restoration companies need a lieutenant, whether it be a GM or a president or whatever that may be?
Yeah, not really, Michelle. I mean, we see it all over the place, really. Now, obviously, startup companies, there's got to be some degree of involvement and levels of authority with the owner to get it off of the ground, unless you've got some really deep pockets and you're just starting up a venture and you're hiring the entire staff, and your intention from the very beginning is to be just an investor, basically, in the business. There is some startup ramp up time that involved there. But no, I can't really say that there's one specific revenue mark that once you hit 3, 4, 5, 10 million that, you need to put a general manager in place. I mean, we have companies that are, just client companies of ours that are just doing a couple million in revenue, and the absentee, the owner wants to be an absentee, kind of owner, involved when they need to be, and they've got general managers in place and the system works just fine.
So what are the general responsibilities that would fall on a general manager or this lieutenant type role? How much should be handed over to this person? What should they be overseeing in general over the company? And then we'll go a little bit further into how that relates to profitability.
Right. So that's a great question. And that's probably the biggest question that we get asked the most when we talk about these senior management positions. So whether it's a GM, a director of operations, vice president, CFO, whatever, kind of upper executive level management title you want to give them, there's no hard, fast rule, right? As far as what their level of responsibility should be. The biggest advice we give our clients is make sure that it's crystal clear, and make sure that whatever performance measurements you're going to use to evaluate that individual's performance are in alignment with the authority that you give them. So in other words, if you're going to give somebody the title of general manager and they're in charge of the ultimate profitability of the business, which they should be, then they also have to have the authority to make the P&L decisions that are inside of that expectation. But you can't really say here's the keys to the car, drive it, as fast as you want. But I'm going to determine where you buy gas and all the rest of that stuff. It doesn't work.
Yes. So how often should a general manager be looking at the company's overall financials? Maybe it's P&Ls, everything. And how often then, in an ideal situation, I suppose, is the owner looking at that stuff? Like, is there a checks and balances system as well once you have a GM in place of how much the owner should be involved on the financial side?
Yeah. So I think there's probably two questions there, Michelle. So you talked about the accountability piece, which would be the owner review, and then also the manager's review. From a performance management standpoint, we recommend that our clients look at things like cash flow, sales, revenue projections on a weekly basis. Those numbers change every single day, and you really need to have some sort of, I don't want to say automated reporting structure in place, but some sort of dashboard reporting structure in place where you can kind of keep your eye on that. That's the dashboard that you're using to drive down the road. So you have to keep your eye on the speed and the gas tank and all the rest of that stuff on a more regular basis. As far as formal financial reports, though, like your profit and loss, income statements, balance sheets, those things should be reviewed on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. And at those intervals, we recommend that it be reviewed with the owner. So it's kind of a joint meeting at that point.
Yep.
But back to the accountability side, with that, we're a firm believer in planning. I mean, that you've been to our business planning retreats before. We strongly encourage people to establish a budget before the fiscal year starts. Make sure that budget is presented to the owner. And then you get the blessing, you get the approval, because there's a lot of authority that kind of goes along with that. When that's in place, then you have kind of a benchmark that you're shooting for as far as the numbers go. And it makes the conversation between the general manager, the director of operations, whoever it is, and the owner very easy, because you can look at it where you're at compared to the plan.
Yes.
And then if you're obviously not, working at the plan, either above or below, you can have critical conversations on what needs to be done to remedy it and make those corrections moving forward.
When you think about the general managers that you've worked with over the years through Violand, whether it's individually or through business planning or the executive summit, wherever it may be, what are some of the best general managers that you've met? What are they doing that's really helping drive their companies forward?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the first in line kind of stuff too with that. The four big things that we talk about all the time: listen to the owner, try new things, accept responsibility, and sacrifice. Just to kind of elaborate on those a little bit, if the listeners haven't read the article. But the owners and the general manager, the second in command, they have to have a really good trusting relationship. And it means having conversations that you wouldn't normally have in front of your staff. And, I know Chuck and I have these conversations a lot, and we started off by saying, it's just you and me talking. But, kind of behind that curtain, the owners have concerns. And as somebody who's a lieutenant and trusted in running their business for them, you have to validate those concerns, and listen to the ideas, listen to the criticism, and really kind of look at it from kind of a filtering perspective, because a lot of it's not meant to get out. But you address those concerns, you validate those concerns, and then somewhere in there, there's always a diamond in the rough, right? There's an idea that comes out of it, and that's kind of the visionary piece that the second in command doesn't always have.
Yep.
But as an executor, you learn to recognize those, and you go, hey, wait a minute, there's something there. Let's take that a step further. We also have to be the first to try new things. If there's an idea, a different way of doing things, I've always been a proponent of, the old saying, never ask your employees to do something that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. So
Yep.
Why not try it yourself first? If it's a different tool, a different application, a different software system, whatever, test it out yourself first before you expect your staff to perform with it. And along with that also becomes accepting responsibility for the decisions and the actions that you make. And that one's a tough one, because I know if you look at the positions that fail, or the individuals who fail in these positions, they have a tendency to kind of fall in the category where they're pointing the finger in other directions. And that may be the case. Look, somebody else may have failed at their job, but ultimately, it comes back up to the top, and you have to kind of turn that finger around to a thumb and say, you know what, I hired that individual, I trained that individual, I was responsible for that idea, or that risk that we took. So accepting that responsibility can be hard sometimes. And then the last thing is sacrifice. As a general manager or any senior executive, you have to be willing to put your own self-interests aside for the betterment of the organization. And that can definitely be a challenge, because a lot of individuals at that top line have a very healthy ego. And it can be tough to say, hey, look, I want to make sure somebody else is taken care of from a compensation standpoint before I am, or I want to give somebody else a chance at sitting in the spotlight, if you will. So so I think those hopefully answered your question.
It did. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I'm curious. I'm sure that there are people listening to this who will be in like a GM type role, and it's like, okay, I understand that the owners, maybe the visionary, maybe in like Chuck terms, they are experiencing some drift and they have these ideas. Whereas the general manager, you're like, I don't really know that that's the best idea. So what is your advice for wading through that like drift or the big visions and trying to weed through like, this is a good idea. I know they really want to do this, but I don't think it's a good idea. What happens in that circumstance?
Right. So that's where the trust comes in, I think. And, looking at it from the owner's perspective, I think it's not just targeted at the individuals who are in the senior management roles, but it's also targeted at the owners. And I think there's some have a level of understanding that look, everything that comes out of my mouth is not in order, nor should it be.
Yeah.
But there's others that kind of have to come to that acceptance, I think, that, maybe that idea wasn't the greatest. So, what I say is, you got to have a filter and a catcher's mitt, because the ideas are coming at you a mile a minute, and you have to kind of filter through them and really sort through them and recognize the ones that are being thrown at you that are those diamonds that we talk about. So you can see it very quickly and say, you know what, I'm going to take that one and I'm going to put it right over here. And when the time's right, we're going to bring that one back out again. I know personally, I've got a big long list of stuff as the things come from me or come down from top to me, and they land somewhere. It's just not always where you think it would be. I
like all of your analogies, the gas tank and the filter and the catcher's mitt. All of these help help bring it all together and make a lot of sense. Okay, before we wrap it up, I would love your number one piece of advice for companies that are looking to increase their profitability. If there was one thing that they were going to do today, whether it relates to this general manager concept or something completely different, just your number one piece of advice for restoration companies looking to increase or do better with profitability.
Oh boy, put me on the spot here, huh, Michelle?
Uh-huh.
Well, looking at my crystal ball, there's been a lot going on in the industry just in the last few years. We've been coming off of quite a few years of consolidation now, where we've got a lot of portfolio companies that have established great books out there, and multiple location companies, national brands that are being established. These folks are getting organized. We're seeing it. The interesting thing about that is you would think that everybody would be kind of jockeying for position to gain market share. And if you look at least our client base has been really fortunate in that the demand has outpaced the supply. So their problem isn't gaining more market share, it's getting the work done. And I think you're going to see more of that, because to me, the battleground right now is going to be waged on and fought on resources, not necessarily market share. So your ability to secure labor, subcontractors, supplier relationships are really going to be the ones that allow companies to be more profitable and grow in the future. That's the single limiting factor. You don't have all the work in the world, but if you can't get it done, it doesn't equate to dollars at the end of the month. So I would say, get organized, get your resources in alignment, and spend a lot of time focusing on that management of that aspect of your service.
Wise words, wise words. There are a lot of companies turning work down because they, for example, don't have enough people. So wise words. Well, Tim, thank you very much for your insights. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you at future events, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, Michelle.